Just have to make sure I'm recording the in the class. So I am gonna have recordings of this lecture and tomorrow's lecture for you guys to revisit. Once again, if you have any questions about anything specific, please ask. All of the slideshows that I'm going to be going over, you guys are going to have access to. So you don't necessarily need to write this verbatim as we go through it. I mean, of course, if you're taking notes, by all means, take notes. I love note taking because it's going to really help you. But other than that, like this is stuff you're going to be able to reference, and each assignment is going to have relative learning material for what I'm talking about. And it seems to have worked pretty well so far at this point. I've been teaching the online class for like a year and a half now, going on something like that. So of course, but if there's anything that I can always do better, please let me know. I'm always continually trying to figure out how to make things that just make more sense for you guys and just kind of work and flow a lot better. But I've waited enough time. Everybody who's here is here. Sorry, one sec, guys. Let me just take a picture, everybody attending, so that I know that you were all here. All right, that should be okay. All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the presentation now, and everybody should have been here. Let's go. Slash. All right, cool. Everybody can see the my screen, okay? Private. All good? Okay, sweet. All right, guys. So exploring digital photography with me, woohoo. Just a little bit about me. I am a wedding photographer in the state of Hawaii. I've been doing weddings for the last 5 years, both photo and video. I've done everything from, really small elopements with like it's just two people, an officiant and me. And I've also had the pleasure of working alongside other wedding companies where we've done weddings that cost up to $1 million, which is really insane considering for us normal people that don't have that kind of money. But my point is, man, I love photography and I love portraits. I love working with people. For me, especially, I think like working with people makes photography a lot more fun. And I think with how many different types of photography that are out there, it's all about just finding what works for you guys and what interests you, right? Because I like working with people, but if you put me out in a beautiful place and ask me to do landscapes, I can take photos. I will, they're going to be pretty, right? But that isn't necessarily what speaks to me as a creative, as a photographer, right? So hopefully when this as this class goes on, you're going to find a little bit more about what speaks to you creatively and then hopefully how to be able to, pursue that and grow that. This class, like I said, we're going to be talking about the basics of like photography, that. I'm going to move this down here actually. Okay, so with the class guys, we're gonna have weekly assignments. I have learning material for each of the assignments that should hopefully explain everything. So, this is a 36-hour class. I forget. So you're expected to do about like 9 hours of work per week, and I think it's roughly about that. So, yeah, but a couple things you should know. This is my email, my office hours. I'm in Hawaii, so I am 6 hour, at least 5 to 6 hours behind the East Coast, which is kind of a good thing because if you ask questions, I might actually be able to respond later in the night. But if I don't respond, please give me at least a day. Anything really important for sure, just keep following up with me. That speaking on that, for those that need early certificates. Now I know they asked you to list it in your when you first signed up for the class. But if you need an early certificate, please, please, please email me as soon as you finish all of your work, and then I will be able to get to everything after. Please give me at least 2 or 3 days. It's I could grade your stuff rather quickly, but I would rather not have to rush to grade your work the day that you need your certificate so that you can keep staying in the US, right? Because why are we taking this class? Well, A, I hope it's to learn a little bit of photography, right? Which is what I love. But B, a lot of you guys are taking this so you can get your credit so that we can keep staying in the US and get your visa credits, whatever. Right. And I want that for you. I don't want to hinder that for you. The one thing I will say is I have due dates for everything, guys. If you don't make it in by the due date, it's not the end of the world. I will still accept your work. Just don't expect full credit. Right. Like we're all people. I'd like to think we're pretty understanding. So as long as you're very open and honest with me and have legitimate reasons, about why some things might take a little bit longer than others, we're going to work with you on that because I think ultimately what's important is you guys being able to get your credits and stay, right, and be able to work. So as for the assignments for the class, I really prefer if you guys use Google Slides for most of it. Reason being, you can do Word docs too, but I just don't think it shows off your work as well as if you're using something like Google Slides, right? So make a Google slide for each assignment. It shouldn't be too difficult, I don't think, especially if you're used to using PowerPoint. If you are unable to upload photos or anything to your Google Slides or have any problems, my best recommendation is to check how much storage you have through Google, and you might need to clean some space up. Right, just because if you have no storage space, you can't, they're not going to let you upload or whatever, right? So, of course, if anything, if you have another issue besides that, just message me. I'll figure out how I can help you as much as I can, okay? As for editing during the class, today we're going to be going over the basics of photography. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about editing. But as for editing, I would prefer if you guys use Lightroom Mobile if you're doing on your phone or your tablet. If you're using your laptop, I do recommend getting Adobe Lightroom or like Photoshop, Lightroom preferably, for at least a month, just because when it comes to editing and when it comes to photography, um, I think having the best tools that work well are going to be really helpful for you. And I've found personally that Lightroom, just Adobe in general, is probably one of the best. I mean, there's other alternatives out there, but I think for what you get and how it's constantly developing, Adobe, I mean, part of why I love them is because they choose to stay current with all the technology. So it's gonna grow with you as you go in photography if that's what you want, right? One other little small tidbit: please do not use filters or presets unless the presets are yours, because it's not going to teach you how to edit if you use somebody else's filters, especially filters or presets. I'll go over a little bit more about that tomorrow. But really, I want you guys to be able to do the base work yourself. And then I'm going to teach you how to make your own preset, for example, which is super easy. And then that's going to allow you to be able to grow your own editing and whatnot rather quickly, ideally going from there. Okay. All right. So we're going to quickly go over the weeks, what we're going to be going on in those weeks and some of the assignments that come through it. It's pretty straightforward. I have this broken up into kind of just 4 sections for the whole class. That first week is going to be learning the basics, meaning learning your camera, fundamental things about photography. The second week is about growing your creativity, right? So there's a lot of really simple, basic ideas of composition, things like that that you can use that will basically kind of help jumpstart your photography sooner than later, I would say, just because the ideas are very helpful. And some of those are things you might have seen before, maybe not have seen before, right? But it's all about using those things and applying it, and that's going to help you just kind of push yourself to function a little bit more creatively, right? The third week, that's going to be our editing, right? That's going to be basic editing. I have a couple advanced editing assignments in there as well, but it's going to be all about how to improve your photography. Because when we talk about photos, right, if you choose auto mode for everything in your camera, is that necessarily going to be the best photo that you could produce? Maybe not, right? If you're letting the camera think for you always, which is what a lot of us have done, which is, not a problem, you're not necessarily going to get the best result, right? You have to be smarter than your camera. And regardless of how smart these phones are, these cameras get, you are always going to have to take some control in certain regards to get the final image that you want, right? Because the way that I see it, it's like I'd say capturing the photo in camera is like 70% of the work, maybe, and then that last 30%, 40%, whatever it might be, that's editing and making it the way that you really want to be, right? And this last week, the fourth week, is going to be our final portfolio. Now, the assignments might seem a little redundant because the first one is your raw final portfolio assignments, meaning you capture a new set of photos for your final portfolio. The second one is editing those photos. And the third one is just displaying them all together as a finished gallery in a finished slideshow, right? So it might sound like 3 separate assignments, but if you think about it, it is technically just 2, right? And if you read my message with the intro announcement about getting into the WhatsApp group, has everybody been able to get into the WhatsApp group? Everybody's all good with the WhatsApp group? Okay, cool. So why that's important, guys, is just because if you are not in the WhatsApp group before before anybody starts making like posts or anything, you're not going to see it. And so when you're supposed to give critique, to your classmates, if you're not in there, you're not going to see it. Oh, hold on, there's a chat. I'm not in the WhatsApp group yet. Okay, so Christelle, if you go into the Google Classroom, there should be an announcement made by Yana. She's one of our wonderful ladies who work for the program. There you should see a link to the a WhatsApp group from there. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna make sure I can see my chat so I'm not missing anything from you guys too. Okay, moving on, guys. I'm just gonna go through this rather quickly so I can get to the actual lecture part. But first week, guys, we're gonna be learning about the basics. A couple of problems that people encounter with their first week is like, I don't know how to take pictures and it's scary. All I have is my phone. Oh no, this isn't good, right? Or this last one is I've heard all the time. It's like my photos don't look good enough and or they don't inspire me, right? So you're learning, right? When you think about learning, let me stop sharing this for 1 second. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Oh my gosh. Never mind, I'll just leave this on here. So guys, when we're talking about learning, right, there's a few different phases of learning I think that people need to realize that they need to go through. The first one is that I don't know anything and I don't know what to do, right? That's the first phase. And I think that's how a lot of people start with anything, right? We're going to start in that phase and then we're going to slowly transition to, okay, I don't know anything, but I have an idea of what I can work on, right? And then as you start working on those things, you're going to be like, okay, I kind of have an idea of what I'm doing and I know what I need to work on, right? That's ideally where I want to get you to by the end of this class, right? Because everybody's going to have, you're welcome, Crystal, varying different, skill sets when it comes to photography at this point, right? Don't expect yourself to be as developed or as understanding as another person. And, it's funny when I talk about photography, I always feel that women are a lot more intuitively creative and are therefore better photographers faster than men, I would say. For me, it took me like 11 years to get good at photography, I would say. I had a really slow journey though. That's my excuse. So it's just everybody's different. That's my point, right? Not to make it a gender thing, but it's just like everybody's different. So just give yourself time to develop and grow and see where that takes you, right? Okay. So going off of that, here's a couple of all the most of the photos in here, guys, are photos I've done, minus the obviously AI photos that I use to create certain examples. Right. So that first week, we're going to be learning about our camera gear, right? Different shooting modes that we have available to us, right? Exposure triangle, very important concept, and then also controlling exposure, meaning how we take our pictures, right? Because when you talk about photos, you hear the word exposure a lot because cameras, in a nutshell, are essentially just like, hold on, right here. So cameras are just tools for capturing light. That's it, right? If you ever try to take a picture in a dark room, what did you get? Probably nothing, or a bunch of graininess, or just something dark, right? So traditionally, the way this works, this is a mirrorless camera, so this isn't exactly how this works technically, but the way it used to work is, you have your lens, there's a hole in it, right? Light comes in when you push this button. Inside, there's a shutter, right? A little thing, and it goes up. Light comes in, it captures the image, and then it bounces back into your camera, and then that is your photo, right? You're exposing your camera to light to capture this image in there. And that's like the traditional way of how everything works. Now you have mirrorless cameras where they took out the mirror, blah, blah, blah. All you got to know is that the word exposure is going to be coming up a lot in photography. And it's really just talking about how you capture your image, not just how you capture the image yourself, how you capture the highlights, shadows, details, how much exposure you have for all that stuff, right? And let me just go back to this. Sorry. Okay, going on. Okay, more photos of me. All right, the second week, guys, getting creative, right? So once we get more into photography, you might find that your photos kind of look the same, right? That can be kind of frustrating. You're like, why is this? Why is this awful? Right? I don't know what to look for. My photos don't look good as other people. I think we have a tendency to compare ourselves to people, especially with things like social media, just how prevalent it is. Or this one is I always throw in things that I used to say, like I'm not a creative person, so my work is boring. That's how I used to feel, right? So in order to develop our creativity, right, we need to learn some creative concepts. I have a whole separate PDF that's going to be in that assignment for you guys to reference. I'm going to try to go through this stuff in our presentation today. Creative concepts. Reading light. Reading light is super important. It's basically how you're using the lighting in your environment to help you develop a better photo or how to use the exposure of light in that image to create a little bit more of a compelling image. Storytelling is super important because it's not just about just taking a photo to take a photo. You know, how do you tell a story with your images? How do you convey emotion? How do you convey anything? Right? That's something that also takes a little bit of work. And this last one, types of photography, that's an idea. It's hopefully just to kind of give you some space to think about what kind of photography you really like and give you an opportunity to take some more photos in that regard. Yeah. Okay. Going on to some more photos that I've done, right? So we talk about storytelling. So look at this photo here in the middle. I was in the Philippines 2 years ago with my girlfriend, and so I've been wanting to see an actual Filipino basketball game for years. And what I mean by Filipino basketball game, it's just like because I'm Filipino and basketball is really big in the Philippines. And this was like a random court and a random team when we were visiting a place called El Nido. Like if you talk about storytelling, you look at the shot. Does this guy look like he's about to drain this? Right? He looks like this shot's like money, and you're like, yeah, this guy's doing it. This shot was so off. It was horrible. It hit the top of the backboard and went outside. Like, but you know that's the aftermath, right? When you capture this moment, and you look at it, what's going on. You're not thinking about, oh man, that guy's probably going to jank that shot. No, you're like, okay, great defensive moment, reading what's happening there, right? It just conveys something that's happening. Versus like if I was just take a photo of them all running necessarily. Okay, going on from that. All right. Okay. Going on to week 3, guys. This is to how to improve your images. This is gonna be editing. So with editing, right, we have a lot of photos. We don't necessarily know what to do with them. Editing might feel like a lot of work to people, you know. Sometimes people are trying to create a specific mood or emotion or whatever it might be, you know. There's also people who think their photos look fine without editing. That's good enough, right? For you, it might be, you know, if that's what you want to do. I'm not necessarily going to sit here and try to change your mind on that. But I will say there are always ways that we can do things better, right? I do a lot of air quotes when I talk about photography too, because there are things, a lot of things are relative, meaning that, you know, it's going to be different from person to person. What I might think will look good and creative might not be exactly what you like or think is beautiful or creative, right? If that makes sense. So when it comes to this third week, we're going to go over just a couple of like just you're going to edit some of your work, right? For this week and of assignments, I am allowing you to use photos you've already taken for the class to edit. I would prefer that you actually use photos that you've taken for the class to edit because ideally with these things you're going to be learning, you know, if you use some of your older work, I mean, you know, you'll be able to edit it and whatnot, but you might be having to fix a lot of the issues that you weren't aware of beforehand, you know? So I think trying to use your more current work for this class is going to help you develop that. So the next one is contrast. So when I talk about contrast, let me stop my screen for a second. Contrast can be kind of confusing because there's multiple forms of contrast, right? There is the idea of contrast when it comes to photo editing. And when they talk about contrast in terms of photo editing, it's the difference between the light and the dark parts of your image, right? Meaning how strongly defined like your shadows are or how bright or not bright your highlights might be. And then you have the idea of contrast as like the concept, meaning how one thing contrasts another, right? You have something called like focus contrast, meaning that like, you know, this isn't like I'm in focus or this is in focus and then the other one isn't. You know what I mean? For example. So the idea and the concept of contrast, meaning that you're going to take a series of photos and edit them to have that contrasting elements. It might seem confusing. Ask for help if it doesn't make sense, right? I just have to kind of explain that one. And then we're going to go into color. I think when it comes to editing, guys, color is probably the most fun part of editing because that's truly when you get to make it your own and just make it different because everybody likes different colors. Everybody has different color palettes that they're very fond of. I have a simple advanced editing technique assignment at the end of that week. With advanced editing, guys, if even with Lightroom Mobile, you have to pay for the program to get certain like other things like masking or like the generative remove, which is like the best remove. You know, if you're doing Lightroom Mobile, I think it's like $7 a month, something like that. You know, if you're really interested in photography, I think it's a worthy expense. I don't have you guys pay for anything that unless you don't want to, because I'm not expecting you guys to spend a whole bunch of money for this 1 4-week class, right? That's not what I want. But if you want to get better and develop your work, that's where things like Lightroom Mobile comes in handy. right? There is another app called Snapseed. I'm gonna go ahead and then let me see if I can type it in the chat. Where's the chat? Hold on. I'm gonna type it in here. Snapseed. So Snapseed is a free photo editing app from Google. If you look in the chat, guys, I just typed it out for you guys. It has a couple of things. It's just doesn't work as well as Lightroom Mobile. That's just it. It's free, it's useful. That's about it. So especially when you look at some of these images, right? When we talk about color, right? These are, yeah, finding a color palette that speaks to you, and using the different environments, especially when you have the different kinds of light. Like artificial lighting versus natural lighting is going to be totally different in terms of color. And it's going to help you learn to control all that stuff too, right? All right. So going on to the final portfolio, guys, this is going to be your last final gallery. Oh, that's what I forgot. Well, let me pull one up, but I put our class photos, everybody's photos in a gallery for everybody to see. And where did it go? Hold on. I'm gonna try to open up the last one I did so you guys can see, but all right. Oh, here we go. Sorry, guys, one sec. All right, so everybody can see this, yeah? So I just do a random photo, but this is how I have you guys, we're displaying your work at the end of the class. So we're gonna have your own gallery. I'm using, I pay for a high-end cloud service for my wedding work. So essentially, it also makes your photos look a lot better. So you're gonna have a great place to display your work at the end of the class, right? I always say that, this class is you get what you put in, you know? So if you're really interested in photography and you try really hard, right, and just to push yourself and take different kinds of photos, this last gallery time is really a great place for you to show that, be proud of that, and really be able to appreciate the work that you've done, right? And the first few, people we've looked at, guys, these are all phone photos. These are all phone photos, right? So I will say the one thing about this gallery is it optimizes your JPEG so that they look a lot cleaner and a lot nicer, right? Handling files and starting that thing can be kind of complicated. That's why I do this kind of for you so that we can make sure your work looks as nice as possible, and then you also have stuff to show to all of your friends, family, whoever it might be. Yeah, cool. So that is the last one I did. Okay, so going back to the final portfolio. All right, so capturing the final images, guys, like what I said about the first time, it seems like it might be redundant, but it's just easier for me to really be able to see what you did and figure out how to help you. That's why I have it broken up into these separate assignments, right? There's the capturing the final images, which should be just the raw photos. It's literally just make a Google slide, put the raw captured, your final portfolio photos. The next one, you're going to do a separate Google slide and you're going to be showing the editing you did on those slides, right? So when I say that, what I mean is, right, let me just pull up this one. Okay. All right. So this is the raw photo. Everybody can see this, right? Okay. This is the raw photo, right? And this is the editing that I did to it. You see all these sliders over here, right? So all I'm asking for is export the image. Always export your images, guys. Please do not use screenshots of your photos. Because if you use a screenshot of a photo and I zoom in, I'm gonna immediately tell like that there's quality loss, right? Because you're not getting the full information. It'll look fine if you're not zoomed in, but as soon as you try to go in and look at little imperfections or see things you could fix, you're gonna have a lot less data to work with. So make sure to always export your photos as JPEGs as much as you can, okay? And then all I'm asking for with this one is like, have the raw photo or have the finished photo, right, in the second one, and then have the slide after. It's going to have the before photo, and then just take screenshots of your sliders, right? So just take screenshots of it, and then you're going to post it next to the raw photo so that I can see what you did. Because in order for me to help you get better with editing, I have to see numbers, because I can look at a certain image and be like, okay, yeah, your shadows might be a little too dark, or your blacks might be a little too high. But in order for me to give you really pinpointed advice on what you need to get better, it's easier for me to see the numbers. Yeah. So, okay. Now going back to this one. Just one sec, guys. Okay, so, and then, okay, does that all make sense for the final portfolio, guys? Any questions about that? Okay, the last one, once again, I want to stress is the critique, the peer critique and review. This is why you really need to make sure to be in the WhatsApp group if you haven't, because you have to share your photos inside WhatsApp, right? And then you guys are gonna just critique each other. You're gonna give each other just good, solid advice. Now, when we critique, guys, this is supposed to be helpful, right? I haven't had any problems in any of these classes, and I'm very grateful. But I know for myself, I'm extremely critical about myself, right? And sometimes when we turn those scopes of critique onto other people, we may not realize that we could come off really harshly. This is supposed to help people. This is supposed to be a good exercise, meaning to uplift one another. Please be nice, guys, and please be honest, but be nice. That's all I'm saying, right? Like, I think in order for us to grow as people, we need to be critiqued. We need to communicate with other people, bounce ideas off of each other. And this is another reason why I like the WhatsApp group, because any questions you might have, you might be surprised at how many other people might have that same question, right? So use the WhatsApp group, right? Obviously, be in it for this way beforehand, but use it to write questions, because if you ask me something specific, I'm happy to answer inside WhatsApp group when I can, and then that might help another person. So please, once again, ask questions. Anything that goes on over here, you should be able to, figure out for me or at least one of your other peers. Okay, but that is the rough agenda for the class, guys. Do we have any questions about assignments or anything? Everything seems pretty straightforward. Makes sense. We're all good. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So now, guys, I'm going to go into the lecture now. I'm going to try to get through this as much as I can in the next hour. Of course, if you guys have questions, please just go ahead and type it into the chat, so that way I can see it and reference it while I'm going through this. But other than that, I'm going to try to get through this in the hour that I have. So, all right. Okay. First things first, guys. Camera phone versus actual camera. I went over this a little bit in the beginning. Does it matter? What's the big difference? Does anybody care anymore? No. And that's beautiful, right? There should be no pressure in terms of what you're working with in this class. Because if you think about it, you have nothing writing on these images, right? And what I mean by that is, I mean, yeah, you have your grades for sure. I mean, think about your grades and do well with that. But if you take a photo that might not necessarily be good, right? You're not going to be turning it into a client who's paying you for hopefully good photos. You know what I mean? That's good. This is for you to develop and grow. So really just push yourself to try things. If I turn in bad photos to a client for their wedding, for their anniversary, whatever it might be, that's a reflection on me. That's going to hurt my business. That's going to make me look bad. That's not good, right? But do you have that pressure in this class? No, not at all, right? And that's great. I think sometimes we create bigger pressures for ourselves, even in these class environments, to be perfect or to create something beautiful and interesting. Creativity is a journey. It's not like a destination. It's a constantly growing and evolving thing, right? So, also, guys, I'm gonna be referencing the slideshow and pointing things out. I'm not gonna be reading things verbatim because I'm just gonna be going over the ideas to kind of speed things up. But once again, just ask me questions if you have anything specific. I have this lecture broken out into three parts: the basics of composition, the exposure triangle, which is kind of just the foundational sense of photography, and then also understanding light, because light is a huge, huge important factor when it comes to photography. Now, the exposure triangle. Has anybody seen this before? Thumbs up if you've seen it before. No? Okay, we got, oh, nice. One person. Anybody else? No? Sweet. So the exposure triangle, guys, if you look at it, it's combined of these three things: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. You see a bunch of numbers here. Oh, I'll go back up. Bunch of numbers here, bunch of numbers here, bunch of numbers here. Now, I'm not a math person. Do you think I expect you to know every single working combination between the three of these things? No, God, no. That would be awful. I'm not a math person. This is a photography class. We can skip that. But the thing you need to understand is that these three things work in relation to each other. Hold on a sec. So these three things work in relation to each other, right? You're going to start changing one setting. And then when you change that setting, you realize, oh, hey, there's this other issue that I might need to compensate for. That's where we look at the one of the other two, right? So when you figure out how all these three things work together, photography makes a lot more sense. Now, the challenge, why this can be kind of harder to learn for some people than others, is that on my camera, I can change all three of these settings, no problem. DSLRs, point and shoots, all of them, as long as they have a manual or even the other shooting modes like aperture priority, shutter speed priority, you're going to be able to change all three of those things. Your phones, oh, it's my girlfriend. You're not able to, right? Phones are a lot more limited in terms of what you can control while you're taking pictures. But is that something that is necessarily going to hold you back? No, right? The thing is, you have to learn about what are the pros and the cons of using your phone versus using a camera, right? Does this look heavy? This is heavy. Carrying this around for fun, like during like when I'm shooting for fun or traveling, isn't always the best idea, right? But this always is. This is always super helpful, right? So once you learn how to control both, it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then you're just going to learn to maximize its ability while working with it to give you the most creative control, right? So going on back to the exposure triangle, let me share this again. I think that out of everything I found, this diagram is probably the most like helpful I've found because it's very straightforward, right? The way that it breaks it up to kind of visually to be for you to be able to see and appreciate everything. The first thing we're going to look at, guys, is called the aperture. Now, you see the aperture, you see this hole right here. So going back to me for just a second. So when we talk about aperture, guys, aperture is the hole in the center of your lens. So you have a number, an F, it's registered by F slash whatever. And depending on that number, the hole in the side of your lens gets either bigger or smaller. You can think of it like your iris in your eye. Has anybody ever gotten their eyes dilated? You've been to the doctor, they your eyes out, you got to wear like the really big, sunglasses because everything's super bright. So what that is what happens is when they expose your eyes to a bunch of light, your eyes end up looking like these two. F/2, f1.4. You see how big that white hole is in the center? So, and this is a little counterintuitive. The lower the number, the bigger the hole is inside of your camera lens. So 1.4, that's letting in a lot of light, right? And if you look on the flip side, f32, although the number is bigger, you see how much smaller the hole is? So the smaller that hole is, the less amount of light is being let into the camera. Now, if you look at the images above it, this explains what it's doing while that's happening. So f1.4, that's a huge, huge hole inside my lens, letting in a lot of light. But what happens is a byproduct of your subject is going to be in focus. But you see behind them how it's super blurry? So that's what's called the depth of field. So when we talk about, aperture and photography, we typically refer to our depth of field, meaning what you can or what you cannot really see in front of and or behind your subject. So when you have a faster aperture, so the way that we talk about aperture, guys, I'm going to use fast and slow instead of big or small. And the reason being is because at f1.4, I can take pictures faster than an f32. Because with that hole being so big, like my camera is going to be able to cycle through photos a lot quicker versus like f32. Hold on, let me see if so you guys can hear the noise and see what I'm talking about. All right, so right now, let's go to, all right, so my camera right here is f2, right? You guys can hear that? All right, let me take this off real quick. So you guys hear that? Here's how fast that is. Now, if you look at my camera, I'm at f2. Yeah, f2, right? Now, when I raised it to, well, this one, as fast as it goes, is actually going to be f16. So, hold on. It's a little bit slower. All right. Well, that didn't work out as well as something. All right, getting back to my point. So, with that, so when you have a slower aperture, you're going to have more in focus, right? You're going to have more in focus. So look at this one behind. You see how the person's in focus as well as the mountain's in focus, right? But see how smaller that hole is? So when you have that much smaller of a hole, that much slower of an aperture, you're going to have to slow down your camera to compensate for how slow your aperture is, right? So when you have a really fast aperture, like f1.4, meaning you're letting in a lot of light, you got to compensate your camera to be faster to capture that light, right? Does that make sense? Right, a little bit. Okay. It comes together a lot more during application, guys. So if it's a little rough in the beginning, don't worry, give yourself time. Once you start putting these all together, it's going to make a lot more sense. Right? So if we go to where is it? So my aperture example is here. So you look at these two photos, right? They are essentially the same photo. I took both handheld, standing still as best as I can. We look at this image on the left. We have f1.4. Remember, that's a huge, huge hole inside my camera. Now, if you're looking at this lighting environment, right, before the picture, before even looking at these settings, you should be able to tell, okay, this is everything's really nice and even. It's still lit up enough to where, but it's not like super bright and sunny. So I would either guess that this is early morning or an overcast day. And so for this, it was both. I was in Japan for the trips of my friends about 3, 4 years ago. My focus point is on this bridge right here. So I have f1.4. I'm focused here on this bridge. My shutter speed is 160th of a second, and my ISO is 50. We're going to explain more of those later, right? So look at the detail here in this bush and in this tree right here. Do you see how it's kind of like blurry, like almost digitally kind of blurry right there, right? So now we look at this image on the right. So let me just scooch this over so I can see my settings. So now we look at this image on the right. They're essentially the same photo, but now look down at the settings. Excuse me. The one on the left is 1.4. The one on the right is f10. We look at those same areas, look at this bush, look at this tree. Do you see how much more detail is in those areas? Right? So if we were to, oh, I don't think I can zoom in on this one, but if you look deeply inside this photo, you look here in the background, back here is pretty blurry. And if you look right here, actually at this point, you get a lot more like detail and definition here in the very back part of your image, right? This is why aperture is really important for things like landscapes, right? The idea with landscapes typically is that you want more in focus so that you can have more detail to show off because the landscapes are pretty vast, right? I mean, 1.4 here in this image on the left, I think it does a decent enough job of telling you what the scene is. Oh, it's a cute little Japanese bridge in Japan. But some people they really want all that definition in the trees back here, all the way in back here, so that people really look into the image more. And if you look at our settings, f1.4, f10, totally different, right? f1.4, you have a really big hole in the camera, this one here on the right. And now f10, we're right between here, right between here. So you can see that this has a lot more of a blurry depth of field. This one, you still have a little bit of a shallow depth of field, but you get a lot more definition inside of the photo, right? And the next thing is going to be your shutter speed. Now, I told you, remember, so f1.4, that's a fast aperture, meaning that we have to take photos faster typically to compensate. So shutter speed, which is the next thing we're going to go over, which is going to be how fast or slow you're taking your pictures. This one, the one on the left, I have 160th of a second. The one on the right is 1/13th. Now, that's a dramatic difference in terms of how fast the camera is taking the picture, right? Because if you think about, like, especially if you think about video, when you think about video, you've probably heard 60 frames per second, right? So the reason why that number 60 comes up a lot is because 1/60th of a second is typically the slowest shutter speed you can use before you start to notice any sort of motion blur. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to go over this a little bit after, but going back to the point though, does everybody understand aperture? Does that kind of make sense a little bit more how it's applied? Now, the thing that is hard for those using phones is that you can't control aperture. You cannot control aperture inside your phones, right? There are apps you can use that allow you to control your camera settings, but even then, despite you being able to control your camera settings, you're not able to control aperture specifically. Why is that? Well, all of your lenses for phones, they have they're fixed aperture lenses, right? Which means they're technically prime lenses, if you know what that is. Essentially, what that means is that they don't have a telescopic feature. They don't zoom, technically, right? So we're gonna get more into the zoom part too, because that kind of goes more into the quality part of it. But the way that you do aperture on phones, before I forget this, is portrait mode. Now, portrait mode is it's a fake aperture mode, essentially, right? Because aperture, you use it as a part of controlling your exposure and how your camera works, right? But with your phone, even if you use something to control the actual settings, you're only going to be able to control ISO and then shutter speed, typically. So aperture, you're not able to control it, but you have an amazing opportunity to do so much after the fact if you use portrait mode correctly, right? Because portrait mode, it has its own benefits and things that you can do in portrait mode that you can't necessarily do inside a regular camera. Right. After I get through the lecture, I'm going to hopefully have time to go over these shooting styles and kind of show you visual examples. But does that make sense so far? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. I don't want to waste too much time. I'm going to go on to the next thing, which is shutter speed, guys. So going back into shutter speed, right? So you see how I'm tying these all together. With shutter speed is how fast or how slow your camera takes a photo, right? So you guys are all responsible for people's kids, right? Let's say that you're trying to take pictures of that cute little kid. They might be messy, they might be yelling, screaming, whatever, right? Would you have an easier time capturing a completely in focus photo of your host child at half of a second or 1/1000th of a second? Which one would probably work better? And if it seems like a very easy question, guys, it is, right? Because if you're trying to capture something in complete focus, then the idea typically is you're going to want to have a faster shutter speed, right? Because the slower your shutter speed, the more opportunity you have for motion blur, right? And if that's intentional, that's cool. If that's not intentional, well, then that means you need to change something. And typically the easiest thing to change would be your shutter speed. Now, when it comes to shooting manual, I think there's this idea that people like assume that in order for you to be a good photographer, you have to like always and know how to shoot manual. I think you do need to know how to shoot in it, but I don't think that shooting in just manual is going to make you necessarily a better photographer. I think it's going to make it a bit of a harder journey until you fully understand how these things work together, right? So I have there's some different shooting modes I'm going to go after that's going to make that a little bit easier. But kind of going back on with this point, so talking about shutter speed, I get to my shutter speed example. Okay, so you look at these two images side by side, right? You have motion blur in one, and the other one you have motion captured completely frozen. Now, just a little bit of context, guys. I've done a lot of things for money when it comes to photography. Nothing weird, right? But one of the funnier things that I did, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. It was a Halloween costume contest and a Halloween dog derby for wiener dogs, meaning that they raced wiener dogs. Like they had these different heats, and it was just, oh my gosh, it was hilarious. The money was awful, but it was a lot of fun. So going back to the point, right? Looking at these photos. So the image on the left, I'm in Japan, again with my friends. This is about 8 in the morning. We had this really nice sun coming off the side of this building. And if you've ever been to Japan, there's a lot of it's a big city, right? Tokyo especially. Tokyo is what I'm thinking of specifically. Although this was in Osaka. So a lot of moving parts, right? I wanted to showcase some of the movement of the city along with like the background and the scene I was seeing. So in order to show this kind of movement blur, motion blur, right, I need to have a bit of a slower shutter speed. But do you notice how majority of my photo is still in focus, even though my shutter speed is pretty slow, right? Because with that 1/15th of a second, if I even move left or right too much, I'm going to have a blurry photo, right? And why is that? And that's because my shutter speed isn't fast enough to necessarily compensate for that movement, right? So in order to do this photo, what I actually did, let me just show you. I did this with my camera. In order to capture this photo, I'm not taking one photo. I'm just like holding it like this and then like bracing myself and letting this do the work, right? You can also kind of pan with it going side by side. But if you try to do this and you have a slow shutter speed, your photo's gonna be blurry, regardless of like what your aperture might be or whatnot, just because it's not fast enough to compensate for that. So the way that this worked, you saw the way that I was holding the camera, right? So I'm pointing right at the middle. These cars are coming by. So I wanted more in focus for this image. So I set my aperture to f14, meaning I'm going to have a lot of, a lot more in focus versus if I was to shoot at something like this one at f2.8, right? And I knew that I needed to be slower to show off this movement. So I went down to 1/15th of a second, which is pretty slow, right? But the cars were moving fast enough, thankfully, that when I took the picture, it was going to be able to showcase this motion. And if you look at this person right here, they're mostly in focus. You get a little bit of ghosting here on their leg. That's because they were also in motion at 1/15th of a second. Now, if you look at the image on the opposite of it with these cute little dogs, right, you see them perfectly like running. This one's actually like fully in the air, like all paws are in the air, which apparently for dog shows, people go crazy over those photos from what I've learned, right? So look at my shutter speed here, 1/1600th of a second, right? 1/15th, 1/1600. That's a pretty dramatic difference in terms of like speed, right? What is the other different thing about these two photos that I think you'll notice is the direction of the light. Now, if you look at this image, right, you see where the sun's coming from. So you see, I want to kind of make this make more sense. You see that the light is coming at me directly at an angle from across that building, meaning that where it's at, the light is actually going to be in the morning or at night, depending, right? Because if the sun's right above you completely, well, then you start to get shadows underneath things, which if you look at these dogs, you see this shadow is directly underneath it. So what does that tell you? That tells you that this was probably about like 11:30, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, which is very hot and very bright, right? And it's direct sunlight. You can see the light coming down on here, but it's bouncing off of the ground too, and then also kind of filling in the shadows areas kind of here for the dogs, right? So 1/1600th, f2, my aperture is 2.8. Why 2.8? The lens that I was using, that was the fastest aperture it had, so I left it there. And I also left it there because if you look here, you still get enough definite, you get perfect, definition on the dogs, which are our main subject. But if you look at the background, they're just enough out of focus to where they don't take your attention away from your subject, but it adds a little bit more visual context to the background and what's going on. Because you can see these people smiling and cheering and taking pictures too, right? So it's stuff like that, right? If I had them completely in focus, if I did f14 for this as well, I mean, you'd still get a similar effect. You get to see the people's like facial reactions, right? And it will add hypothetically to the story you have going on in this image, right? But having that separation through something like your aperture will help the intentionality behind your image and the focus you're trying to create, right? Because the focus for me is clearly on these dogs. And then looking at these people in the background, that's secondary, right? But that gives more people to look at. So, okay. But shutter speed, makes sense? Any questions, anybody? We're good? Cool. All right. So the next one, guys, is going to be, I haven't talked about it much, but it's going to be your ISO. You see these ISOs under here? This one's at 50 and this one's at 100. Before I get into that, the easiest way to understand ISO, guys, ISO, you just have to think about it as your camera's sensitivity to light. All cameras typically are going to start at ISO 100. This is something you can change, no problem. ISO 100, if you're shooting in the middle of the day, you have a decent amount of light, your aperture doesn't need to go super high. ISO 100 is going to be fine for pretty much most things, Only times like when you need to start raising your ISO is when you aren't able to get a good enough measurement with your shutter speed and your aperture together, right? Because if I took a photo at 125th of a second, right, with like an f2 aperture, and this is just a rough example, right? And I got a good exposure on an image, cool, right? That would be fine. But if I left it at 125 and went from f2 to f16, is that image going to still have the same proper exposure? Probably not. No, because I slowed down my aperture, that hole got slower. All of a sudden, that means I need to also compensate my shutter speed to match with that. And that means I'm probably going to have to slow my shutter speed. But if I go from 125 to 1/8 of a second, Do you think I'm going to have an easy time capturing that photo? Probably not. So how do we make it easier for ourselves? So if we get at this point where we need to raise something besides our to compensate, this is where ISO comes in. Because as this number raises, you're essentially doubling your camera's capability for accepting light. So let's say if I go from 100 to 200, right? I was at one, I went down to 1/8. I'm at 11, f11. I should be able to raise my shutter speed now a little bit higher because now my camera is accepting more light hypothetically, right? And you can push that even higher to where you're getting even more light out of your environment. Now, the byproduct of raising your ISO, unfortunately, nothing comes for free, right? If you stay in these lower numbers, I would say 100 to 1600, you're going to have probably the least noticeable effect. But as you raise your ISO, you're going to start to get these little dots in your image. Now, these little dots, what are they? They're what's called digital noise. It's not the same as film grain. Film grain is, typically like an added like digital effect in your photos that people use to kind of recreate that old school film vintage look for photos. Whereas digital noise are imperfections in your image, meaning that you are pushing your camera too hard, meaning that you don't have enough light for the photo you're trying to capture with the current settings, or you're using a higher ISO or that you probably don't need. And this is why I say taking control of your camera is going to be very important, right? Because there are times, especially with like, even with our phones still, where you're going to have, like, let's say your aperture or well, if it's your phones, you can't control that. Let's say like your shutter speed's fine, but your phone might be like, oh, I guess you need ISO 3200 for this photo outside because that makes sense to me. If you're shooting outside in a bright sunny day and you have ISO 3200, you're probably doing something wrong. Just saying. There's a good chance that that photo is not going to come out the way that you want, or your settings are going to be totally screwed up and it's not really going to be making any sense to you, right? So the easiest way to think about it, if it's sunny, like it is for me right now, like outside, I probably will need a lower ISO. If it's darker, right, or it's later in the day, or it's nighttime, or I'm walking to a building and the light's darker, there's a good chance I'm gonna have to raise my ISO. Right. So the examples I have for this is this. So the one on the left, we went to Seoul right after Seoul, South Korea, right after we did Japan. This was at a place, I think it's Namsan Seoul Tower. So it's mid morning. I think it's like 9, 10 o'clock. F1.4, I probably could have raised my aperture because of how much light there is. Like F1.4 is letting in a lot of light, but I probably could have done F2 just to make this a bit easier for myself. So I left it at 1.4. I like the look. You can see everything's very sharp. If you look at the sky, there is a lot of like kind of a haze to it, meaning that it was a pretty bright photo. We look at my shutter speed. My shutter speed is 1/4000th of a second, which is pretty fast, right? And then this one, I actually dropped my ISO down to 50. Now, why did I do that? So I told you ISO typically starts at 100, right? Especially for a time frame like this. Now, when your ISO goes up, you're essentially like doubling the amount of light you're allowing in, right? And so the same could be said for the reverse if you go backwards. So when you go backwards from like 200 to 100 or 100 to 50, you essentially need half as much light as the previous ISO to capture a proper exposure. I know that probably sounds a little bit confusing, but if you just think about it in context like this, so if I was at ISO 100, my shutter speed would have been 1/8000th of a second. 1/8000th. Why I did not want 1/8000th of a second is because that is the fastest shutter speed my camera could take. And when I was at 1/8000th of a second, the light was actually the meter was blinking. And when your meter is blinking in your camera, that typically means that okay, something's not right. Something's either too high or too low, right? So for this one, it was saying like, okay, I'm maxing my shutter speed, but the area was so bright that it's not fast enough. I didn't have enough shutter speed basically, or I could have raised my aperture too, right? For this lighting scenario. But leaving my aperture the way it is, and not wanting my shutter speed to be maxed, I dropped my ISO from 100 to 50. So now I'm at 1/4000th, which is hypothetically in my safe range of being able to capture data on my camera, and I was able to capture the image just fine, right? Now we look at this other image on the right, f1.4, still letting in as much light as possible. We have 1/80th of a second. Now look at that. That's a dramatic difference between the two. 1/4000th, 1/80th. If you look at the ISO, sorry, it's a little cut off. The ISO is 2000. ISO 50 versus ISO 2000. Let's think about our light sources here. My light source on the left, I have the sun. I'm outdoors. It's an overcast day. There is a lot of light. This image on the right, this was in Japan. This was in a cave. There was this really cool Buddhist temple. They had all these like effigies, and it was a hand carved cave into the side of a mountain. And the only light source I had in this cave are candles. So you can see the lights coming up from like behind these little like idols here. So that quality, that quantity of light is totally different. Now I have to start making some compensations to adjust for that light. My aperture here makes sense now. 1.4, I'm letting in as much light as possible, meaning that I'm taking in as much light as this area is willing to give me. I had to slow my shutter speed down to 1/80th of a second because, I'm crouched down and I'm trying to get this shot too. So like I'm moving a little bit. So I wanted it to be fast enough to where I can move a little bit and still capture a photo in focus, ideally. My ISO is at 2000, and I was like, that's pretty high for what it is. I raised it there because that gave me just enough of the light that I was looking for. And then I knew after the fact that I was going to be cleaning stuff up in Photoshop after. Now, I might be kind of hard to tell, but if you look in this area, do you kind of see flecks? Do you kind of see like little dots if you kind of just kind of crane in on it? So those tiny imperfections, that's digital noise. The higher your ISO goes up, the more you're going to see that kind of digital noise. There are ways to compensate for it inside editing to clean it up. But once again, there's a threshold. There's a point where like you're going to be able to clean it up no problem, and then there's a point where like you might as well just have taken another photo or just got rid of it, right? So, but okay, ISO, does that make sense for everybody? Aperture, ISO, shutter speed. So the combination of those three, right? The combination of those three are going to come together and have you make a photo, right? When you are doing photos inside a DSLR, right? You're going to see, you're going to see all of your settings kind of right there in the bottom, right? You'll see your ISO, you'll see your aperture, right? And then you have like a light meter that typically tells you if like, you're going too far, right? But with phones, your average cell phone, right? You don't get any of that. You don't have any sort of control. You just got to work with what you got. Oh no. Does that mean it's the end of the world? Does that mean you're not going to be able to take cool, creative photos just because you don't have this? Absolutely not. And that is the beautiful thing about photography is that there are so many ways for you guys to capture images and do them in a fun, personal, creative way that you shouldn't feel limited just because you didn't spend 6,000 on this altogether, right? Like I do this professionally, so I have to spend this kind of money on gear to keep up with like industry standard qualities. You have a cell phone, it works great, right? You just got to learn how to apply and use this stuff. Now, before I go into, because what is after this? Basics of composition. Before I go into the basics of composition stuff, I want to finish with that. I want to go over application real quick. And I'm going to start with cell phones because there are some things that you can do with your phone that I'm not, that some of you might know, but what I found not everybody is entirely aware of. So when we talk about our shooting modes for cameras, right? I'm going to start with the phone. The easiest thing with phones, guys, is going to be what? Your photo and portrait mode, right? There's also panorama is definitely a photo mode for your camera. I don't have you doing panoramas for the class. That's to me kind of an advanced thing. And I will say doing it on your phones is only so well. It works only so well. But going along with this, right? So you have your regular photo app, right? Your regular photo mode. Real fast. Does anybody have Samsung, Google Pixels? Anybody have something different? Nobody? I don't see. Okay. So awesome. Majority of us have iPhones. That's kind of like the standard now, guys. But I do have a separate hold on, slide here that all this stuff I'm going to be sharing inside the Google Classroom, guys. But I do also have this phone photography slide that is going to show you kind of just parts of your phone, where things are located, just in case you are a little iffy or not as familiar with your phone camera. So this is going to kind of help you figure out where all those are located. But to kind of go along with this, a few things that I want to point out first is live photo, and then if you have it, the raw max feature, right? So for me in my top right corner, I have the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Oh, come on. All right. In the corner here, I have like the live photo button, and then I also have where it says raw max. Now, to kind of explain what raw max is, so if you don't know the difference between a JPEG and a raw photo, to kind of put it simply, so JPEGs are basically already processed images that have been reduced in file size to where your camera basically it takes the picture, it applies some edits to it, it shrinks it, and then it gives it to you. And then it's like, here, this is your raw, this is your JPEG, excuse me. This is your JPEG. This is your photo, all the content's inside. We've all crammed it in there. It's a lot smaller. You can take a bunch more. There you go. If you compare that, this is a JPEG. I am a raw photo, meaning all of me in comparison to this. I know it's a bit of a dramatic size difference, but if you think about the amount of data that you could work with here, or the amount of data you can work with here, right? It's a substantial difference. And that is the difference between working with a JPEG versus a raw photo. That's why photographers, especially when you work professionally, we're typically, I don't know very many photographers that shoot only in JPEG. And the people that I have met that do so, they give it makes me paranoid for them. I'm like, what if things don't work and you need to fix things? That's just so strange because you only have so much information to work with, right? So with those of us that have iPhones, when you take a picture, it applies that auto preset editing thing to it, and you can't undo it or stop it from doing it, which kills me, right? Because instead of working with a truly, just like a blank or like a simple JPEG, you're already working with something that has editing applied to it. Meaning that when you get to the next step, you can only do so much before you lose quality, right? Because if you're trying to edit on something that's already been edited, well, then you're basically taking away chunks of data, right? And you're not going to get the best finished quality result. Now, shooting raw photos is going to give you a lot more to work with, and they might seem a little bit more. They're not going to be as nice looking off the bat because it's going to be just the blank photo, meaning that you are going to have to do more work to it. If you want to shoot raw photos, awesome. If you have a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, I would recommend you shooting it because that means you probably have an SD card already that can handle all this. But just know, guys, the size file difference is insane. Like once you start doing raw photos, if you haven't already done so to make space for it, you're going to be running out of space really fast because they're so much larger, right? It's going to give you a lot more to work with, but there's the trade-off. Now, live photo is another thing that is actually going to affect the quality of your images because if you shoot everything in a live photo, you're still going to get the image, right? But Apple, they have their own proprietary like file software. So what it does is you're not using your whole sensor. You're using a part of it to capture this little moving video. And then you're just grabbing freeze frames from that video for your photo. Does that make sense? So instead of taking the actual photo by itself, you're clipping a photo from a video, hypothetically speaking. So my point is, if you want the best quality from your phone, the first thing I would do is I would probably just turn off live photo, the easiest one, right? And I would consider shooting raw if that's something that interests me. Me, for myself, of course, I'm gonna shoot raw. But for you guys, make the decision, try it, see what the size difference is like, and then being able to edit on the different photos, you should notice a difference. Okay, terms of application though, I gotta kind of speed this up because I only got 20 minutes. So right now, actually though, what I'm gonna have you guys do, or what I would want you to do is when you're shooting with your phone, you should see this little arrow on top. Right? If you click that arrow, you should see a series of things pop up on the bottom, right? The first thing I want you to look for is This one. Do you see the plus, this circle with a plus and the minus? So that circle with a plus and the minus, that's called your exposure compensation. Now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with where if you touch the screen and it does the sun and you can make it darker and brighter, right? So that's also controlling your exposure, meaning you're telling your camera to make it darker, make it brighter. But you know, as soon as you move and you tap something else, it goes away, right? So that circle with the plus and the minus, if you click it, right, you're gonna get a little slider, and you can either make your photos brighter or darker or brighter. And then instead of having to like tap to change it, it's gonna stay there, meaning that you're basically telling your camera to, oh, I want all my photos to be a little bit darker already or a little bit brighter already while taking them with my phone. Now, the thing to remember is if you use this, remember that you used it. Because if you have it set to like -2 for your exposure compensation and you're like, why are all my photos dark? Well, that's probably because your exposure compensation is still turned on, right? Little cheat sheet just to make sure, even if you forget, if you look in the top left corner, you should see that little thing that's going to tell you plus 0.7, whatever. Mine says, yeah, plus 0.7. That is going to show you your exposure compensation, and you can just click that, and then it'll take you right back to your exposure compensation, right? So that makes sense, everybody? All good? Okay. Portrait mode. Now, portrait mode. Has anybody ever tried to take a portrait mode photo and they try to do a full body of like their friend or somebody and it didn't work? Has it ever happened to anybody where the portrait mode didn't work for them? The reason being, well, I can't talk today. Why it wouldn't work is because in order for portrait mode to function, it's got to be able to capture onto the subject, and then it's got to kick in that digital effect. Because you know when you get exposure mode to work, right? You start to, excuse me, exposure mode, portrait mode, you should see like that blurry, you should see that blurry background, right? And why I love portrait mode, and this is what I was kind of talking about earlier, why it's like a superpower, is because, so this is what my photo looks like the way I took it, right? Now, if we click on these little line things on the bottom to edit the image, well, I gotta access my phone. Okay, so now we're here to edit the image. The thing that I love with these newer phones is after the fact, you can change what's in focus. Like, instead of focusing there, I want to focus in the background, right? Or whatever. I can pick anything. Can I do this on my $6,000 camera setup? Absolutely not. Right? I'm not trying to make this about money, but what I'm saying is that if you think about the capabilities of you being able to take a photo in portrait mode and then change what's focused on after, and not only what it's focused on, if you look underneath it, you see this slider, right? So now if I bring it to the opposite direction, everything's really in focus. If I go the opposite or the other way, I can turn it off. Like, think about what that means for you and your photography, because now you have a little bit more leeway and also a little bit of a safety blanket of like, okay, I think I like this photo. I'm gonna focus on this thing first, and then take the photo, and then I'll maybe check it out later and see if I need to fix anything. And that's amazing. Because in order for me to do anything kind of like that inside my phone or my regular camera requires a lot of effort and a lot of like Photoshop, and that's not stuff that I want to do, right? So the other thing about portrait mode is if you really want it to work well, don't use your one times camera, your one times lens. If you have any further lenses, use a longer focal length, because portrait mode works much better with zoomed in focal lengths because it's able to focus on your subject more and create that digital aperture effect a lot better. So for me, on average, right? So I have the 14 Pros. I have the 1 times, the 2 times, and the 3 times. For me, I'll typically do it between the 2 or the 3. The 3 if I can help it. And if you're out in the world taking portrait photos, and you're like, oh well, I can't get my whole person in this shot, even though I'm using my 3 times. Back up, scooch back, move your body, right? You got to move yourself to fit them and to get it to work. So it's going to kind of challenge you too in order to get these photos to work the way that you see it. The one other thing I will say about portrait mode is that it's not just for people. Portrait mode is not just for people. as you saw that I did with this mic, which isn't anything necessarily crazy, right? But being able to create that separation of my subject versus the background creates more intentionality. It creates, oh, somebody raised their hand. So what, Montserrat, am I saying that right? Yeah.
Yeah. What is the purpose of special mode?
Special mode?
Yes.
So which special mode are you talking about?
In the iPhone? Special?
Oh, spatial. Oh, okay. So you have one of the newer ones. So I haven't fully messed around with the spatial mode. I honestly don't understand it entirely myself.
Mm.
I would say right now, try to do portrait mode instead and give me like a day or two. I need to look into that to give you a better answer because that's a lot more common in some of the newer phones. And to me, I've never fully used it, so I don't understand the full purpose of it myself, but I will be able to answer your question. Sorry, one second.
All right.
Set an event for tomorrow to look up spatial mode in photography. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up for you guys. Guys, if there's something that I'm not fully aware of too, I'm happy to look things up and try to figure it out so that I can explain it to you. Just because things are constantly evolving. Things are constantly evolving. Okay, I gotta do this quickly because we're running out of time, but did that answer your question a little bit, Montserrat? Does that help a little bit? I'll try to, I'll get to that answer soon, okay? I promise. Um, Other things, guys, with phone photos, real quick. So when you have the live photo turned on, there are two things that you're able to do that I think are really cool. So do you guys know about burst mode photography? Anybody? So when you're taking pictures, let's say you're at a sporting event or whatever, and there's a lot of moving parts, instead of, does that look like it hurts? It does. It's annoying. It's not fun to do. So the easiest way, and you have to do this all in one motion. So if you want to capture a bunch of photos really quickly, touch the button and move immediately to the left. And what happens is you see how those numbers are popping up. So what that is now it's collecting, rather than doing the live photo thing, what it's doing instead is it's capturing burst photos, right? So meaning that I have a lot more photos that I can pick from in that time frame, you know? So rather than just kind of relying on live photo and then constantly pushing the button, if you do the burst mode photo, it makes it a lot faster. That's something that can be really helpful depending on what you guys are doing, right? And especially if you have a fast moving subject, if you follow them and pan with them like this, or like if you follow cars, there's a good chance if you can match the moving speed of that subject, that thing might be in focus and other stuff might not. So it's a cool, creative way to push yourself and try things while you guys are out taking your photos. Okay. Portrait mode, photos. Honestly, that's kind of I don't want to take up too much time with that, but that's pretty straightforward for cell phones. If you knew that stuff, awesome. If not, I mean, that's something that you can try for sure. When we talk about shooting modes for cameras, guys, just make this really quickly before I try to finish off with the basics composition. When I talk about shooting modes, we have these dials. You see mine says M, S, A, and P, right? So I have a Sony, so mine are going to be M, A, S, and P. If you have a Canon, it's going to be M, A, and then TV. So M is for manual. I'm sure you guys all familiar with that. A stands for aperture priority. S for everything else stands for shutter speed priority. If you're Canon, they use TV, which translates to time value, which why it has to be different, I really don't know. But that's your shutter speed, right? Why I'm bringing these up is because in manual, you control everything. But if you go to shutter speed priority, right, instead of controlling everything, you're controlling just the shutter speed. And when you're controlling just the shutter speed, it automatically sets your aperture. And depending on if you have your ISO set to auto, then it will set your ISO as well. Why I like that is because while you're still developing, going right into manual is not going to be doing you any favors unless you want to work really, really, really hard, a lot longer, and maybe for some reason compared to the rest of us who just want this to be a nice, straightforward, easy process. So, me shooting professionally, guys, I actually shoot in manual maybe 10 to 15% of the time. I would say 85% of the time, I am actually shooting an aperture priority, meaning I choose my aperture and then it changes the just my shutter speed for me automatically. Why? Well, because I know for a fact that when I open it up in Photoshop, there are things that I'm going to be able to fix, right? but I don't want to waste as much time having to think about taking the photo. As long as I know that if I can look at it and I know I captured that photo like 80%, right? 80% correct, I should say, then I know I'm going to be able to fix the rest. So for those that are using their DSLRs, if you want to kind of, make that a little easier on yourself, I would recommend using one of those specific auto modes. Do not use the P mode. P is just basically it's sensor program. That's your standard, like I do everything for you, which doesn't always work well. It'll work in certain in situations, right? And there are times where it created a decent photo, but the likelihood of it being consistent as consistent as you can be is pretty small. So does that make sense? Everybody get that? Okay. Cool. I gotta jam through this last part, guys. I'm sorry. I know it's taking a while to kind of get through some of this, but I'm gonna just kind of breeze through the basics of composition. So these guys, this stuff I have in the individual assignments. So you're going to be able to reference not only this slideshow, but these specific PDFs that I have attached to those assignments. Okay. So composition, just kind of keep it simple and straightforward, guys. Composition is basically everything you choose to put in a photo, everything you choose to put inside, right? If you take a photo of anything right now in front of you, whatever elements are in there is part of your composition. And it's all about intentionally using that or removing things or placing them in certain parts of your image to basically get the most out of them visually for what you're trying to do, right? First one that we cover is the rule of thirds. If you guys are, whether you're shooting on a DSLR or your phone, I would recommend turning on the grid display. You should have the grid display turned on. It should look something like here on the right. And the reason being is because like using these lines, they're going to help you balance and structure your image a lot better than you probably could by yourself, right? So to kind of go on with that, if we look at these images, right? So the idea with the rule of thirds is, hypothetically speaking, if you put your subject on these intersecting points, it's going to make your photo more interesting. That's just like the simplest way I can explain it, right? But what instead, you use it as basically all little frames that you can tie in all of the parts of your image. This one on the right, this is a pretty wide photo. I like negative space, right? So I probably have a bit more open sky than I need. But if you think about it, like this is a nice frame with them down here by themselves. This is a nice balanced photo. This is a nice balanced photo, so on and so forth, right? So you're using those boxes to kind of put everything together to create your overall image, right? And then using those lines as well as to where to place things. Because if you think about this photo, I have a line here with the tree, a line going through here, which ties in with the bottom of the building, and then another line kind of roughly right over here, which kind of comes down with the building itself. Here we have that bottom line here, another line here, and you see, especially the way this kind of evens out here, the way it flows better, right? If you think about it vertically, a line here, person's in line with that, line here, this is in line with that, subject here, top separation here, right? So you're basically using those to put all the boxes together to make one big photo, right? And the things that you are going to be putting in your composition are going to be a lot of these ideas that I'm going to be going on after this, right? So leading lines is the first one. So you're essentially using lines, right, to create visual focal points in your image or telling your viewer where to look. Like this is just an alleyway in the Philippines, but this line of the road right in the middle pulls you all the way down. This is Il Duomo in Italy, Florence, right? The lines and the shapes of the buildings pull your view and your focus all the way down into this gorgeous building right here. This one on the left is crocodile, alligator, I always forget. But the lines of the railing I'm standing on, the line of the pool it's sitting in, you see how all of it's pulling your eyes into the specific parts where you want them to look, right? Framing. Now, this is pretty simple. If you think about like looking for a window frame in your environment to frame your subject or the scene that you're creating, right? Here, I use the frame of these torii gates to focus on all the people. Okay, all the people here at the edge of this little in between the two gates. I use these two slats in this railing to focus this viewpoint here in the Philippines. I put the Statue of Liberty here. So these are where you can get really interesting with these kind of compositions, because this might feel kind of like wasted space. But if you think about this line being in the center, our focus point goes here to the Statue of Liberty. Now all of a sudden I have this open space that I'm looking at the texture. I have this person and their coffee in their hand, right? That you're using these different elements to kind of break them apart to create different frames within your image, right? Symmetry and patterns, guys. So it's just the repetition or the repeating of certain things that are similar to create a little bit of a visual effect, right? So you have the repeating lanterns, you have these strong bamboo trees leading all the way down. Once again, that could also be leading lines. Some of the concepts that you're going to use, guys, they could bleed into other concepts. Just pick. It's really up to you to decide which one it is and how you want to use it. Perspective and angles. This is super big because if you think about what most people do when they go traveling, what do? Oh, hey, there's this beautiful thing. Okay. And then we leave. You just walk in, you take that one photo from right here, and then they're done. If you pay attention to the way that people take photos, everybody's like this all the time, right? Are you always going to get the most interesting or the most like emphatic photo keeping the same perspective, the same angle for every single shot? If you have the problem of where you feel that all of your work looks the same, well, chances are you're taking it from the same perspective, right? So this is where you got to get creative. You got to go high, you got to go low. You got to play around with where you're taking the photo from to give you a whole selection of different viewpoints that just might make it a little bit more interesting for you and your viewer, right? So for example, like this photo on the left, like I was in Japan, my buddy was walking in front of me. I saw this like cool shadow from this aquarium. We're going to an aquarium. So I had my phone tilted up and forward to elongate the shadow and time it with my buddy who happened to be walking by just this time. The one on the bottom, this is in San Francisco. I'm just pointing up. I'm like just framing up to capture like the way that these are spaced out. And this image on the top right here, this is that Buddhist cave back in Japan that I had for another photo. But now I'm using part of the wall to block out some of my framing to create more of a visual separation and distance between what is my focal point and where I'm taking the image, right? So there's things that you can do to add perspective, to add depth, right? Negative space, that's intentionally using open space around your subject, to kind of create an image. Here we have the open space of the water leading into the boat, the open space of the sky surrounding these birds, same in the sky over here, really emphasizing the detail and the of all the rocks that are over here, right? Balance is a relative word. So balance can either be like the literal definition of balance, like how things balance each other out, or there's the idea of balance, which is what I kind of lean more into. So when I think of balance, I think about like nature. So you think about the balance of like these trees surrounding this little like cool small waterfall. That one's a little bit more like abstract, so you can kind of just figure out what works for you. Creative composition, unconventional angles, breaking the rules. Learn the rules first. My thing is, guys, like, yeah, break the rules once you're more comfortable, but learn the rules first so that you can get a good foundation, right? And then these are just some other photos I've taken on my travels, some of my classes and whatnot. So, lighting, guys, like, okay, rather than going through this slideshow, I'm gonna just try to show you some things visually. So we're just about to wrap up after this. Lighting is everything, right? Lighting is one of the most important things that you guys can really focus on while you're developing photography. So if you look at the space that I have in here, where is my light coming from? My light's coming from my window that's open here on the side. Now, if I close this window and make it dark, oh, there it is. Okay, now you can see there's still a light source in here, right? And now my camera took a minute to adjust, but look how much different the light is, right? Now that I don't have a strong shaft of light shooting behind me, and I have a light focused on the wall, bouncing off of the wall and coming onto me, right? Now that the light is hitting me, I'm really standing out. I'm well defined here. If I turn off this light, what do I have now? I have the light from my computer screen and my laptop coming at me. So you can see it's a real soft light, but look at the shadows and everything behind me now, right? You see how it's a lot more like noticeable. There's a little bit of bleed of light coming up in that top corner, in that back corner too. So your eyes might actually get pulled in that direction. Now, if I turn this light and I face it directly at me, now you see it's very bright, right? And it's a very strong direct light. And you can see like the light bouncing off of my glasses, the reflection, but you're getting a strong light source directed at me, and now you're getting a strong shadow behind me, right? So now that I open this back up, look how different all this is. Now I'm having a lot more shadows. There's a lot more different random light sources coming from around that it might not create as even of a lighting scenario as I might want. So when it comes to using lights, my point, pay attention to where it comes from. Pay attention to the time of day you're taking your photos, because the photos you take at 8 a.m. in the morning are not necessarily going to be the same as the photos you take at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. And those might not even be the same as the photos you take at 6 o'clock in the evening, right? Because the sun, the way everything moves, lighting moves, it's going to change how you're able to work with light and at those different times of day. So you just got to figure out how to pay attention to where your light's coming from. Is it coming through something? Is it artificial light, or is it the sun? Or is it a street light? Like whatever it might be. So you just got to understand where your light's coming from and how to use it. That is the biggest thing that I can say about light during this class. Okay, cool. We are just about just out of time, guys. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there any last minute questions before I let you guys go? Give me a thumbs up if you're all good. Okay, everybody seems good. Cool, we're all good. Much as we can. Awesome. Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. What's your question?
Okay, so I have like a older digital camera
Huh?
and my phone, and I wanted to ask you if I could use both or if I have to like
Do
focus
both.
just on one.
Do both.
Or
Yeah. If,
okay.
if you have it to take pictures with, I want to see it, right? Like this is where it's going to be up to you to decide what you want to use,
Yeah.
right? And during this process, you might figure out which one you prefer. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have no problem with that. Thank you for asking.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, everybody all good? Okay, guys. Yeah, we're going to see you guys tomorrow at the same time. Tomorrow, we're going to be over just editing, guys. Thank you so much for showing up. I appreciate it. I'll see you guys then. Take care.
Thank you.